Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Chris Stone with us, and we're going to talk about benefits and challenges of remote mob programming as an introvert, remote mob programming as a way to keep programming jobs remote and out of the office, and using retrospectives for improving process and encouraging mobbing skeptics. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can get into those topics.
Yeah, my name is Chris Stone. I've been remote mod programming for 2.5 years now, currently at Samcart as a senior software engineer. And I also help co-organize the Software Crafters Atlanta meetup.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome. Well, let's talk about I guess the impact of remote mob programming and being introverted. What do you have to say there?
Yeah, it's like when I first kind of came to mod programming, it was in the kind of remote form, and I know it sounded like a very odd concept, and not sure that it was for me. And whenever I talk about mod programming, I feel like certain people kind of self-select out of it. Like, I'm not sure that is for me. But as people will often say, like, when you actually give it a try, like, you might end up appreciating it. And yeah, there was something about it that did seem to just work. When I first gave it a try, like, I was able to contribute. It didn't feel quite as much of a burden as maybe I thought it would. So, like, I gave a presentation on mob programming as an introvert recently, and one of the things I say is, um, I do admit that mob programming as an introvert can be draining, or even for people who are not introverted. It can be draining. It's a lot of social contact. It's a lot of coordination, but I think there's a lot of communication coordination that we don't really think about, even with solo programming. There's always a level of coordination that is required, and in fact, there's some things about mod programming that actually kind of eliminate some of those other types. Like, for example, there's fewer pull requests that need to be written out, and asking certain people to, could you please look at this pull request when you have a chance, and then hopefully I write up a good pull request description, so that when they do finally look at it, maybe several days later, they understand what I was going for. And then in the actual, like, code review process, I might not hear back for a few days, and then either get like a very long thread of, here's everything that was terrible about the code you wrote, or maybe just, yeah, this all looks good to me. And, like, well, surely there was something I could have learned in the code that I wrote, but maybe it was too much. They had their own priorities to go back to, so they couldn't afford too much time. So, like, that's one example of some of that communication that kind of can go away. Because in my experience, it seems like feedback at the time that you're actually working on something, it doesn't feel as severe, and it can be easier to give feedback. If someone's saying, here's a change I'm thinking about making, as opposed to, here's a change that I put days into, and I'm very proud of everything I did.
Nice, nice. Love it. Yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, I feel like when the mob is high trust, the cost of feedback is almost effortless. It's almost nothing, right? Once you've established that. Where even if with someone that I have higher trust, but I talk with less often, there's always that, math I'm doing in my head, like, have I built up enough trust with them? How are they going to perceive this? Where when it's just kind of like, on the fly brainstorming with someone else, that kind of goes away. And I definitely love that. And maybe before we dive more into that or other topics is, I love that you're taking the angle as mob programming from an introvert, because that's kind of like one of the classic responses is like, oh, it's just an extroverted thing that people just like to talk over each other in a room and then code at the same time or something. What do you mean by introvert? Like, kind of where are you coming at it from in that?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it is kind of a spectrum. There's different, it can also be kind of a loaded word, introverted. Where I come from and where I kind of see myself through this label is, I do appreciate kind of being with people and being around others. I think that talking can be a bit effortful at times, trying to come up with the right words, and also being around people for too long can be kind of draining. And I've definitely seen where I've had teammates that have identified as extroverted, and they can be around people pretty much any time of day. You know they love the small talk, all of that kind of stuff. For me, I normally don't go for the kind of situations where like I don't know what the expectations are going to be socially, or there's going to be too much talking. But I feel like with mob programming, it doesn't always feel like when we have a team meeting and we're brainstorming, that can still kind of feel draining. But when we're talking about code and we're all focused on a solution, it's almost like at least for me, trying to see the code through, is something else I can focus on. And I might be doing a lot of talking, but I'm not even thinking about that as much as I'm thinking about what can we do to get this problem fixed. But yeah, normally, like if we're talking about like more like abstract conversations and less of a concrete thing, then it can be challenging.
Yeah, yeah. And I think most of the people I've mobbed with, I would suspect, or I mean, like you said, there could be different ways to use the term, but for example, like in the Myers-Briggs type sense, introvert. But one thing I've noticed about them is that there's difference between talking with like a trusted group that you're very comfortable with versus small talk with random person at 7-Eleven while you're waiting in line, right? And I feel like some people love that, and maybe that's what they mean by extrovert. Like, I can talk to anybody at any time about any subject, where I feel like even the most quote unquote introverted people, they have people that they don't mind talking to and it's not draining, but it's not a random person at a stoplight or something.
Yeah, like if I could just hypothetically imagine, what if every day I came into work, it would be a complete random assignment. Might be at least a couple people I've probably never seen before, and have to introduce myself to. That could probably not be as fun for me. But I think like meeting people that you can actually like build like a good connection with, and build trust with. And another thing I've been thinking about is like at least in my experience, the kind of people who seem to be willing to actually do mob programming as like a permanent thing, have some kind of common characteristics. Like if you're willing to spend all day working with people and talking with people, whether you see yourself as introverted or not, you're probably someone who is empathetic, is someone who's humble, willing to be honest and candid about things. So I think even if maybe you normally like, I will go to a local meetup sometimes thinking, I'll try to, meet some people and network, and then kind of end up in the corner of a room and not not know how to take myself out of the corner. But if I'm with people that, I know, like, we're all committed, we're all here for each other, that really does help and go a long way.
Yeah, I think we've also seen the um I think I've heard this idea that's like, oh, I'd rather work alone, but the quality of the work is so much higher that I end up preferring this because maybe the person is a little bit wants to work in cleaner code, and that is less daunting than working in dirty code separately as well. So I've heard that one too, which has been interesting.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and I really like this idea of, I never thought about it that way. It's almost like a litmus test, right? When hey, who wants to try this? The just even the presentation of the idea itself, a lot of people self-select out. Not to say that they're bad people, or anything like that, but the idea of showing up says a lot about what that person's willing to try.
Yeah.
Um, and now that I think about that, I don't know if I've ever had anybody show up for a experimental mobbing session that didn't have the attributes you were talking about. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of a time. So I think that resounds really true with me. So yeah, I mean, you've talked about some of the benefits, and maybe what are some of the challenges for you coming from that introvert perspective?
Yeah. One thing, like, we talked about, like, when there is a level of trust, and when everything's been built up. I think that, sometimes, that can be kind of a challenge of getting that trust and kind of building that psychological safety. And I think, with that, like, there's ways of trying to help bring about those, like, with, like, team chartering activities, or like other group activities, to try to, like, understand where one another's coming from. But yeah, there's a delicate balance of, like, how do we make sure that, um when we have a team of people who, have varying, you know social preferences, how do we make sure that everyone has the warmth in the room for contributing when they have something to contribute, but without pressuring someone. Maybe someone, doesn't have much to say on something, and not, like, pressuring them to speak if they don't, but making sure that if someone could have something to say, that they can say it, and that they can feel safe saying that.
Nice, right on. Yeah, and I think I suspect, I mean, it's a challenge for any person, but I suspect for some people it's harder than others. Kind of the Satir change model of every team change, right? Some will feel that dip bigger than others, and so, because then that trust has to be built back up, right? And for some people, that can be built really quickly. For other people, that might be weeks or months, to build that up. And so, yeah, I can definitely see that being a challenge, because you're not lightly collaborating with someone, right? Like, trust always matters, but it especially matters within a mob, I think, for sure. Cool. Yeah. But where did you speak at, by the way, on introvert, mobbing as an introvert?
Yeah, there's a local conference where I live in Atlanta called Atlanta Developers Conference. And
Nice.
yeah, just a small kind of developers conference, but I've done some some speaking, and I'm going to continue to see if maybe there's some other conferences I can submit to, which I can actually talk about that briefly. Like the again, there's the calling myself an introvert, but also speaking at conferences. But like the thing is like I'm someone who like I appreciate what like trying to get into a mode of teaching can do for your ability to really learn something. And so I like being able to kind of package up my thoughts in that way and also like hear from other people. But yeah, when it comes to conferences, I'm not as strong in the hallway track. But if I've got a presentation that is rehearsed enough, I can just power through on that. So, you know, it's not that I can't speak, but the impromptu ad hoc speaking can be difficult. But again, I mean, I enjoy being around people, so I keep giving it a try.
And in general, I think it's a really valuable skill for anybody in development or even in management or at kind of any of those places. But because I think that at some level, not being able to do some sort of public speaking, even if it's just in the context of presenting to executives or presenting in maybe even a lunch and learn or something, at some level it sort of becomes career limiting too. And so it's always important to stretch that muscle, or at the very least. But I also just public speaking can be a lot of fun, and I think from the introvert topic, I think presenting is very different than like social interaction. And so sometimes I've also heard introvert versus extrovert being described as being around other people is draining for introverts versus energizing for extroverts. And so sometimes people just get really, really tired having to socialize. And so you can have an extrovert that is not talkative, and an introvert that is very talkative, but maybe the way that their energy levels respond to being around people can differ. And so that's another thing. But in the remote environment, and while mobbing, I think there's the context of concentrating on the problem and bouncing ideas versus saying like, oh, what do you do for a living? And oh, that's interesting. Like just trying to make small talk. I think those are very different activities, and maybe use different parts of the brains too. So
nice. Yeah. So a coworker of mine just shared a link with me. It was a blog post on all the benefits of learning in public. And one of them was, you have to like collect up your thoughts, share the context, and that helps your own learning and all those kind of things. And then also is getting feedback. So have you gotten any feedback from your introvert talk on mobbing yet? And how's that been?
I've gotten a little bit of feedback, and it kind of, if I may, I think this kind of goes into the next topic a bit, which is like talking about remote mob programming specifically, and kind of some things I've been hearing about a lot of remote jobs of going back to the office and requiring office attendance. There were people that I was speaking to at at maybe a local meetup or a conference, and just seeing where do people work and how things are going for them. And there's definitely a trend of a lot of jobs are asking people to come back to the office, and there's various reasons for that. And disclaimer, like I think working in an office does work for some people. But one thing that I hear is the problem with working from home is we just can't collaborate the way that we used to when we worked in the office. And when I hear this, it really strikes a chord, because ever since I have started remote mob programming, I have felt more of I've collaborated better, and it's kind of felt more like the ideal office experience compared to when I even worked in an office. Uh, so like one of the pieces of feedback that I did get from the talk that I gave is from someone who wasn't really sure if mob programming was something that he could convince his team to do. But there was something about how I described the the way that we do uh, mob programming, which is we'll have like an all day long video call that anyone can join. Like we use Zoom. I know other teams could use Teams or Google Meet or some other provider, but we just have that Zoom call that anyone can join, and it's like a meeting room. That's where all the developers will come in for the day, and then product managers, designers can just pop in whenever they have something, or we can ask for someone to join. And this person who came to my talk said, I'm not sure if my team would be open to mob programming, but I do want to go back to my team and bring up this idea of having like a Zoom room that we can have open all day, and maybe we can convince them that there is some collaboration we can do from a remote standpoint. There's an opportunity for that kind of water cooler chat that everyone says is missing, or there's a little bit of friction if, like, let's say you want to ask someone for help on something, to say, do you have some time? Let me schedule a meeting. Let me check your calendar. But being able to type, well, I'll be in our room. Come join whenever you can. Can really like reduce some of that friction, just make things easier. So, I thought that was really interesting, of like the principles from mod programming helping with, you know, other people, even if you're not programming, like even for non-programmers, just having more, like using these kinds of tools for that kind of shared space.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I've seen that too. I've sometimes, so we have learning hour, learning time, and sometimes I'll do a more formal learning session, and other times I'll just spin up a room in one of the public areas, like a remote room. And it's interesting just to see who joins, just to hang out and chat, or join in whatever code I'm working on, or come talk about whatever. And I think you're right, like there is, yeah, like it's kind of like breaking the ice of creating the meeting and checking with someone, and all these things that people feel like, it doesn't feel maybe thoughtful, because there is you don't want to, like, I've heard, because sometimes I'm in the mode where I just start pulling people into the mob without giving them any heads up, and that can feel a little intense. But so you can go too far that direction, but also just making it easy for someone to join, like click of a button, as opposed to check schedule or have a 5-minute direct message chat back and forth to figure it out, right? Yeah, I think that's awesome. And so I guess if you were doing this, would you just start a room and just kind of leave it open and be in there all day, or would it actually be like an unmanned room, so to speak? Yeah, how would that kind of work?
Yeah, like how we have it is, anyone can join. Like it doesn't wait for a specific host. So
Okay.
I what I was recommending to this person is to kind of set the same kind of thing up. Maybe you don't have to feel like it's up to you to keep it going, but um, if other people on your team, or maybe even in the company, kind of know about it and know that, maybe I just want to see if anyone's there, and just see who I can chat with, kind of like the water cooler chat. Or maybe it's a space where, if I want someone to look at something, I can say, hey, I'll be in the room. That it's just there, and anyone, if the room is empty, anyone who goes to try to join it basically starts it.
Nice.
I I find that so there are a lot of articles out there about the return to the office push being led by managers who want to manage by walking around. And it's funny because I think mobbing and a lot of these remote tools actually help with that, observability, transparency. No one can say that any individual is not being productive because they're all working together and bouncing around with each other. People can join those mobbing sessions automatically and step in. So like all of those arguments kind of fall apart. I also think that this idea that the availability of people, I think that especially when you're separated by multiple buildings, if a company has an in-person face-to-face culture, then you're spending a lot of time walking around and everything, and I think in general the in-person is just ends up being a lot more wasteful when it comes down to it, from a time standpoint and kind of a momentum standpoint. So I like this idea, and creating the water cooler conversations as well can be very easy. Remote team building maybe becomes a little bit harder, but in general, I think you're actually at a net benefit in those regards. So I totally agree.
Yeah, and that, just to jump in real quick, yeah, I think I'm really glad you brought up this topic because, every time in my experience, maybe there's someone out there who's seen something different where they say remote meetings are terrible, or remote collaboration is terrible, or remote is not as good as in person. When you ask questions to find out how they're doing it, it's like, oh, well, if you do it that way, of course it's going to be terrible, right?
Yeah, 2-hour presentation and then got some feedback.
Right, right,
So
right. Yeah.
super.
And it's never something interactive like with a remote mob programming session or open room or something like you're talking about, right? And so and I agree with what you said. Some people like, there's some close friends of mine who just like, I like the routine of driving somewhere, being somewhere different, having the different space, and having the whole physicality of walking around and talking to people as opposed to clicking around to join different rooms and that kind of thing. And that's totally fine, and that preference is fine. But I think that turns into a preference, not it doesn't work. The remote way doesn't work, kind of thing.
Right. Right. And like, some jobs, like it might, like some companies, maybe it does make sense for some in like office attendance to start up again. But yeah, if the reason is we just can't collaborate remotely, it's like, well, is that really true? Because we can talk about that.
Yeah, the tooling is a lot better today than it has ever been in history as well, and so
right,
it's such a hard thing to take at face value anymore.
Yeah, so follow-up question to that is, I sense remote is having semantic diffusion problem, where because it's kind of like because a bunch of people have tried it since COVID, they think they've tried it, but they haven't really, I mean, they've tried a version of it, and then so they label the whole thing one thing, and I kind of seen the same thing happen with education, whether, home or remote. The same thing. They experienced a very specific iteration of remote or home, and then they walk away with a broad sweeping opinion of the whole thing. It doesn't work or something like that. How do you respond to that problem of people thinking they've experienced remote?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess that kind of goes to why I another reason, like, I felt inspired to come up with a conference talk, trying to get the word out, knowing that there are other answers out there. How do we get the word out, and like the story of the feedback after the talk. Maybe not everyone starts adopting mob programming, at least like the same way that we do at our companies, but there's still some principles from it that have value, that are worth giving a try. And I think it's kind of getting the word out and kind of encouraging people to give some things a try, even if maybe they have some preconceived notions. It's like, well, what has your team actually tried?
Might be a good segue to the next topic as well.
Yeah, I
Using
think so.
retrospectives for improving processes and for encouraging mobbing skeptics. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah. So if you feel like your team could try something new, and a retrospective would be a good mechanism for driving that. So like in my opinion, like having a retrospective on, like, whenever like collaboration is deemed to be very important on a team, whether that team's mob programming or not. The retrospective is like one of the most, if not the most important recurring meeting that team can adopt. It kind of goes back to some of the things that I was saying about like psychological safety, and making sure that people have a safe space to kind of bring up feedback, positive and negative, things that they did like and did not like, because what works for one team doesn't really work for all teams necessarily. And I would say, kind of like I was saying before, like a team can't really say that they do or do not like certain things, or certain things don't work for them, unless like they've tried it and seen, how does this end up working in our context. So another thing is, like, in my experience before mob programming, I've been on teams where we didn't have a team retrospective for like maybe every 2 weeks. But ever since I've been mob programming, it feels like any cadence more like that's longer than once a week kind of feels odd, because it for me, I feel like I need a, like even just me, just personally, I need a mechanism for being able to talk about things, and getting to hear from people. If I'm not sure if other people, like, maybe I feel okay with something, but I'm not sure if everyone's on board. And it's not just about sharing feedback, but I want to be in a team where everyone is kind of feeling free to give that feedback and can feel safe giving that feedback.
Nice, love it. Yeah, and I'm definitely with you. Yeah, I'm almost gotten too spoiled, where if it's been more than a couple days, I'm kind of like, I don't remember. If I thought something was wrong, I would have said it then, or something. And so, but I had one follow-up question that I think ties back to the first topic on introversion, extroversion. So I have this debate in my own head. I'm going to invite you both into it. When there's times where I feel like the formality of retros feels like too much, and we should just have a chit chat, just like, hey, what do you think? What's going on? What do you want to do better? What could we do? What's going well? What's not going so well? Kind of have the spirit of retrospective happening, but not so formal with like following all the stages in the Agile retrospective book, or things like that. And then there are times where it's done formally, and I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of kind of having the official steps? And then maybe a follow-up question is, does it relate to the introvert extrovert question in your experience?
One thing I'll say is a pattern that I have seen. Actually, I think basically, I'm thinking back, like, since mod programming, we've used this pattern of rotating a retrospective facilitator. So making sure that as we have retrospectives, that people can take turns actually facilitating. And I think that's also interesting from another level. Like, we want to hear everyone's feedback, but we also want to hear what, like, how people approach the whole format of the meeting. And some people do stick very closely to the defined stages of an agile retrospective, and some people, maybe it's like a little icebreaker, and then it's just one big lean coffee facilitated discussion. And first of all, I think that's kind of interesting, like, just to see what different people expect out of it. I'll say, in my opinion, I think sometimes the overly formal ones can go a bit much. And if we're focused on like some kind of uh gimmicky theme for the retro, like, are we more focused on that than the feedback part? But sometimes I worry that if there's not enough structure, then if it's just someone saying, okay, come off mute, who has feedback, is someone going to feel not so safe bringing their thing forward? So I think it depends. I think maybe shaking it up every now and then can be helpful. It's kind of my thought.
Probably a good all things in moderation
Yeah.
sort of thing. Yeah, I think so. I have two thoughts there. Well, like, number one is constraints breed creativity. So informal feedback often will lead to things that are different than so it's like, oh yeah, this thing that we just worked on was this and this, and you give your feedback and maybe choose an action item and go from there. But if you did a three little pigs retro, which I like in particular, because it definitely causes you to think a little bit more outside the box. So which of our systems are a straw house, a stick house, and a brick house, and then talk about where people disagree only, right? So if everybody says this is a stick house, then or a straw house, then yeah, everybody agrees it's garbage, and we haven't retrospected normally to like get away from it. But maybe you find opportunities and where people's understanding is different. And so that's just an example where you do that retro maybe once a year or something, very infrequently, mixed in with in informal feedback sessions, and that can expose things that have long lived, or even doing liberating structure, creativity type stuff, or you can broaden out. But I think the biggest risk of going really informal with it is that your chance at innovation is, I think, very low, because you're going to be talking innovation and creativity is very low, because it'll just be whatever comes to mind at the moment. And especially if your retrospectives are focused on pain, right? So another really important one, I think, is bright spots analysis, and turn up the good. And so I think if you don't have a retro that has no way to enter anything negative in it, then most retros, I think, do tend to focus on the negative. And so it's always, let's fix the problem, rather than like notice the thing really good going on and do more of it. I think teams are less likely to amplify the good without specifically doing bright spots analysis. So those are a few that I would not give up on.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. I've seen in cases where maybe if we try to generate some topics, and we don't see much, or maybe just like one or two negative things, there's a tendency to think, okay, well, if we said what needs to be made better and we didn't get much feedback, then things must be going pretty well. But the flip side is, this is our time for giving the team feedback, and if no one brought forward anything positive, then what do people actually appreciate about how we're working? It's not that the absence of positive feedback means, or necessarily, as long as people are reminded to bring their positive feedback, It doesn't necessarily mean like all is well. It could mean that maybe people are apathetic, or not passionate about some things that they're working on or how they're working. And yeah, I think making sure that feedback is also sought as well is important.
Nice. Yeah, and I really like what, kind of putting together what you both said, mixing up the retro styles, whether less structure, more structure, different formats, things like that can help. I think you're just kind of, maybe one idea is you're looking at it from different angles, and like maybe that's where the constraints breeds creativity. Is sometimes no constraints will help you discover something that you wouldn't discover with constraints, and vice versa. The constraints will help you discover something. And so I think that's all great. And one awesome thing about mobbing is sometimes you're having retros without even knowing it. Like someone mentions something that's good or bad, and then you take action, and you've just completed the essence of what you're trying to achieve with the retro without any of the formality of it. But oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's also sort of a proficiency thing, right? So a lot of people think of retros as happy, sad, upvote, discuss, action item, move on. And like that's only like true and useful like to as an introduction, I think. But as you branch out to the different formats, then you're going for different things: creativity, longevity, sustainability. All of the ilities might have an individual retro for it, that then can create new types of brainstorming.
Yeah, awesome. And before we run out of time, you did bring up the topic in relation to skeptics. So I wanted to give you a little bit of room for that, Chris. So yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, my thoughts there are, when there are, maybe people who join a team who, are kind of interested in the whole mob programming idea, but they're still kind of on the fence of, is this really how we can work all the time, and on almost every hour of every work hour of every workday, um or maybe if people have been willing to mob, but maybe seem like they are unsure about certain things. I think kind of going back to the whole experimentation part of the retrospective, I think is important, and saying, let's just agree to work a certain way, but let's feel free to propose some kind of experiment. And that can be as small as, we're using 5-minute timers. What if we tried using 7-minute timers? Or it can be as big as, we might not have like a formal learning time kind of configured for our team, but what if we break out some time to do a group learning time? Or what if we have individual learning time? Like, I don't know, let's give it a try for a week, see what happens. Like I said before, you won't know what works for your team with their specific context until you actually try it. So it's making sure that people who, whether they're like fully on board with different elements of mobbing, or maybe, because also like going back to the like what you were saying about how with remote, people think that, or some people think that I've seen how remote work works, and it's not very collaborative. Something that I've seen come up is mob programming can be, it's supposed to be very good for knowledge sharing, but what about all those times where one person just really knows what's going on, and no one else in the team's really sure what to do, and you just have that one person who knows everything, sharing everything. And like in that case, it's like, that's not necessarily because of like a flaw in mob programming as a format. It's, have you heard of strong style navigation? No. Okay, well, let's try it. Let's make sure that even if the navigator doesn't really know everything, let's have them try, and then they'll call upon the knowledge holder if they really need it. But before we think about throwing it out, because like, I don't know, it's just a format that ends up with one person doing all the talking. Like, well, no, there's things we can do to work at it. There's all kinds of experiments we can try. And if that feels weird, hey, how do you feel about trying it for 1 week? And if it was bad, let's throw it out. But we won't know how it feels for us until we try it.
Yeah, love it. And I think that's the wonderful thing about retrospectives with the experimentation mindset is it's kind of how mobbing is naturally feels human and talking and giving feedback. Experimentation, I feel like naturally has buy-in in the sense of, because it's open-ended, it's not like I'm inflicting this result no matter what the data or the experiences are. It's like we're trying something and it may not work, and so we'll find out if the people who are for or against it, we'll find out. And usually it's some blend of 5 different things, but it has that kind of intriguing nature of let's try and see. And teams often find the ways to make it work well for them, and that's awesome. And so love to keep chatting, but we're almost out of time. And so is there anything you want to share or plug before we close?
Let's see. I'll just say, as I said at the top, I'm one of the co-organizers of the Software Crafters Atlanta meetup. So we are currently meeting. It's still virtual, so you don't have to be in the Atlanta area. We are meeting on the first Tuesday of every month. We have a book reading, a coding exercise, and space for lightning talks. So feel free to look us up on Meetup and come to one of our meetings.
Well, Chris Stone, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a really enriching conversation. I've learned a lot from it, and it's been really good. And so thanks for being on the show. And to our audience, please like and subscribe. Please share with others, especially someone who self-identifies as introvert, or someone who might be interested in remote styles of collaboration and might be open to hearing about that, or experimentation retrospective. So please share this episode. And until next time, have a good one, and mob on, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.